Wool is wool.
Even, but if you get the cashmere too hot, it shrinks.
Right.
But it really does.
Okay, it's not necessarily the heat. It's the speed at which it cools. And the friction from the agitation.
It won't
Correct.
normally tell you on the box, but dyes will work in cold water. I have cold water dyed certain things before. It takes longer. Make sure that you dissolve your fabric in. I mean, you dissolve not your fabric. Yeah, make sure you dissolve the fabric. That will never be a problem again. Make sure your dye is dissolved well in warm water. You can go ahead and let it cool down a little bit if you need to. Be gentle. I mean, if these are really, really precious sweaters to you, yeah. Don't go too hot. If you've got one that you like more than the other, dye it first. I mean, one that you like less than the other, dye it first. Because again, all fibers are going to be different depending on what kind of wool it is. I mean, well, you said cashmere, but it's.
What you're going to want to do is when you dye it, don't pull it out. Let it sit and let the water return to room temperature on its own.
And as far as the whole wool thing, if I'm dyeing a hat, like if someone brings me a musketeer hat and says this is tan and I need this to be deep purple, there's an entire process behind taking something that's as thick as like a wool hat. There's a lot of substance normally in a hat, things like hat sizing, sometimes shellac, which, yeah, if you put shellac in your hat, yeah, I told you to do that. I'm sorry, don't dye it after that. Yeah, it's soak your fabric minimum 24 hours. Overnight. You want that wool will take forever to really totally completely become saturated. You can't just dip it in the sink like you do other fabric. Let it sit. This stuff is industrial wool. I use this for a lot of stuff, a lot of hat making, a lot of armor making. And if I need the dye, if I need this to dye and I need this to dye like into a solid color, it has to soak. It has to soak for hours upon hours, because that's the only way the dyes. I mean, you can take a piece of this, dye it, and cut it in half, and then it's still white on the inside. And when it starts to break down, you will start to see that white come through the fabric. So, depending on what you're dyeing, over soaking is never a problem. If you think it needs to be for 20 minutes, leave it for 40. You know, go watch Lord of the Rings and come back. I don't like to spin sweaters out. I really don't. I rinse them. I get all the dye out as much as possible. I'll lay it out flat. Yeah, don't squeeze it too much. Really, you're not going to. Wet's good. It's going to drip plenty as you're walking from one place to the other to put it in there. So there you go. But it's I no one's ever looked at me and said, hey, you had your fabric too wet. You know, again, that water is water, or water. It's a great, fantastic conduit for pulling the dye through the fabric. So just have fun with it. Don't overthink it. But you know, it's your sweater. I mean, you love it now. You'll love it if it's completely the wrong color.
If you're using cotton, don't wring it, because unless that water is fairly evenly distributed throughout the fabric, if you're using a RIT, which presumably the fiber reactive content is going to target it, it's going to concentrate where the water is most concentrated, and so those little creases where you really wring it out, it's going to show up as a faint line in your finished product.
I am incredibly glad they brought the Dharma catalogs here today, because I forgot mine, but Dharma Trading Company is about the best place you can go to look for this stuff, especially if you're going to be thickening dyes for painting or doing things like shibori dyeing, where you use wax releases and things like that to add patterns to it. Oh, wait a minute, fun trick. Anybody here ever dye and want to put patterns and stuff into their dye? Okay. There's some really neat things out there. I've done it with beeswax. I've done it with Crayola crayons.
Batik?
Yeah. If you just go and, yes, batik dyeing. If you just take a Crayola crayon, and just have fun with this when you go home. Draw a pattern on your fabric, dye it, and then iron out the wax. And wherever you drew on it, the dye will not hit it. So I saw this girl. Yeah, I saw a lady who had to do some kimonos that had to have these wonderful Chinese characters in them, and I sat there with hot wax and just painted all of the characters in. And we took it, we dyed it, and then we got the wax back out of it, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, there's several ways to do stuff like this. There's actually stuff out there now that you can paint directly on dyed fabric and then iron it, and it pulls the dye out of just that spot. And you can find all of the stuff in the Dharma catalog. So if you got one, keep it, love it.
Okay, after this, I'd like to take a few minutes about achieving particular colors.
You mentioned ombre dyeing a bit, and I was wondering if you could more about that and about maybe achieving smooth gradient.
Okay. What kind of ombre dyeing are you going to be doing? Is it some, do you need like from a white to a black, or just a nice little pretty fade?
I'm sorry, it's very different.
Okay.
Well, there's two different kinds. You can fade from one color to another, or you can fade from pastel to dark, and they're two very different processes.
The basic process behind it is you're going to take your fabric.
The question is about ombre dyeing, which is on your form if you don't know what that is.
Okay, I take a spray bottle of water, and I take a spray bottle of dye. As long as the fabric is incredibly wet, the dye will run through it. So if I spray on dye and I hit it with water, from whatever point I sprayed it, it's going to start running down. So it's going to follow that water. This is fabric that's hanging on a line, okay? I will take my spray bottle, I'll spray on the dye, I'll hit it with water, it'll start to move down. I have to keep that dye moving. I start out very light. If I need to go heavier, I'll go heavier toward the bottom. The big problem is if your fabric is too dry, or if you don't have enough water happening in it as you're ombreing it, you will start to get splotches. So that water bottle is going to be your best friend to keep the dye moving. As long as the dye is moving, you will not get blah, blah, blah. You should get a nice concentric run. The layers on this. This is actually about dyeing and distressing. Oh, by the way, real quick before I just give the mic over to him for the thing. Dyeing and distressing is one of those fields in theater and in movies that's always going to need somebody. It's probably one of the more lucrative fields to get into. The people that I know that are incredible dyer distressors continuously work, because especially in the movie industry, you may have to have one guy who looks like he wears one costume for the entire show. But if it's a progression of time, or if he's in the desert, I think we did a movie once where the guy actually had 150 different versions of the same white shirt. That someone had to take it from start pretty white to all effed up at the end.
And then do the same for his stunt double and his body double. And
if you make one for a movie on a hot day, go ahead and make 4, because the director's going to say, these got sweat stains, switch his shirt out, dry that one, and you have to keep it moving for continuity during the scene. So being a dyer and distresser is one of the most valuable things you can have on a movie set, because, I mean, no one just says, bring me 5,000 distress costumes. They bring you a lot of stuff, and you have to make them look that way. So really knowing the techniques. This was actually very similar to ombre dyeing. This dress was totally wet when I took it out of the washing machine. I just dipped dye to the bottom edges, and then I took a spray bottle and an airbrush and went through. Something we haven't gotten into yet, but to get the little spattered effect here in some of the whiter tones, I did take an incredibly diluted bleach. I mean, incredibly diluted, like if the bottle was this big, there's maybe a teaspoon of bleach in there. And I lightly misted the fabric while it was wet. If you hit it dry, you're going to get little droplets. If you hit it wet, you're still going to get little droplets, but they're going to be very, very tiny, and they're going to disperse. I let it set. Freddie back there will tell you that you bleach it and you wash it right then. That does work. I usually let my bleach set where it has a chance just to fade a little bit more, and then I rinse it out. For that, it's more distressing. Oh, sure. I didn't bring my hose today, so I'm not going to wear it, but it's...
Aw, man.
But that was maybe about 30 minutes, and that was stark white when I got it. But my wife said, I want to look like a screwed up little girl that's lost her teddy bear. And I'm like, I can do that for you, dear.
Okay, now all of what we've discussed so far has concentrated on simply getting the dye onto the fabric. Now, how many of you are targeting a particular color, a particular shade? Most of you, I imagine. Okay, I got started into dyeing when, some of you may recall this.
Yes.
Okay, the little RIT dye recipe in the back for the season 1 Next Generation jumpsuits. They don't work.